I was 19 when my sister called me an embarrassment. She didn't scream it. That wasn't her style. She just said it the way people say things they've already decided are facts. You make things harder than they have to be, Sarah. It's exhausting. She was pre-law at the time, already walking like the world would open its doors before she ever had to knock. I was studying psychology, working 2 jobs, and losing sleep over the things no one else in our house wanted to talk about, especially what I saw in Dad's office. Especially the documents he thought I didn't understand. A week after that conversation, I came home to find the locks changed. There was no note, no warning. Just a trash bag of my clothes on the porch, still damp from the sprinkler. My mother stood behind the living room curtain, pretending not to watch. When I knocked, she didn't come to the door. But a minute later, my phone buzzed. "This is what happens when you don't respect boundaries," her text read. They said I was unstable, overly emotional. But the truth was, I wasn't breaking down, I was waking up. I had taken one file, just one. A report that linked a private security contractor one Dad used to consult for to a string of misconduct cases buried under bureaucracy. I didn't go to the press. I didn't even confront him. I reported it quietly through the proper channels. 2 weeks later, the call came. Not from a journalist, but from a recruiter. Someone who said my name had come up in an internal referral list. I thought it was a prank at first. Then I remembered something my aunt used to say before she passed. Sometimes the door that slams in your face is just making space for one that opens louder. So I left Tucson. No dramatic goodbye. No suitcase, just a backpack. 2 textbooks and a folder full of student loan paperwork I never got to use. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not because I was running, because I needed to build a version of myself they'd never be able to touch again. The first bus out of town pulled away at 3:42 a.m. I watched the desert disappear behind me in pieces. By dawn, I had chosen a new name. By nightfall, I had no home, but I finally had a reason. In a bathroom stall at a Greyhound station outside Flagstaff, I cut my hair with a pair of scissors meant for fabric. I watched long black strands fall into the sink like the last traces of a story I didn't owe anyone anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I just kept cutting until I saw someone else in the mirror. I registered as Vale S. at a small day labor agency 2 towns over. Just enough name to work, not enough to find. The first few weeks I slept wherever was safe, sometimes on the floor of a shelter, sometimes in the back corner of a laundromat that didn't ask questions. I cleaned diners before they opened, sorted crates behind warehouses, delivered food on a borrowed bike. Every dollar I made went toward one thing: night school. I signed up for online courses under a scholarship I wasn't sure I qualified for. I passed every exam like it was a test no one believed I'd take. At one point, I shared a studio apartment with 3 women, all older, all undocumented. They never asked where I was from. I never asked why they prayed before every meal in a language I didn't speak. We existed in quiet understanding, each of us holding something we didn't want the world to see. Then one night, a man named Bishop left a card for me at the front desk of the job placement center. No title, just a government extension and a sticky note that read, "You did the right thing. Let's talk." I didn't call right away. I carried the card in my wallet for weeks, afraid it might be bait or, worse, a test. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Someone had seen what I reported, and instead of burying it, they passed my name forward. When I finally called, Bishop didn't sound surprised. "We've been watching you," he said plainly. Not in a bad way, in a "you might belong here" way. I wasn't sure what here meant yet, but I said yes. And a month later, I was on a train headed north to Oregon, my backpack a little heavier. My silence finally doing something louder than any apology I was never given. Quantico broke a lot of people. It didn't break me, but it did burn through who I used to be. I learned to run on 4 hours of sleep and cold resolve. I learned to shoot without blinking and lie without trembling. I learned how to vanish in plain sight. My scores were average in the beginning. Not because I lacked the skill, but because I never asked for attention. Eventually, that became my advantage. No one suspects the quiet one. No one watches the one who doesn't need to be seen. By the time I graduated, I wasn't top of the class. I wasn't bottom either. I was unremarkable, and that made me perfect. They placed me with a small unit specializing in human trafficking cases connected to financial laundering rings. I analyzed patterns, cross-referenced visas, followed money. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. It was easier to stay in motion than to remember how I got there. Years passed. I moved through cities, aliases, assignments. I answered to Vale to S. Reed, to whatever name kept the work clean and the trail cold. Sometimes I wondered if my mother ever lit a candle for me. Sometimes I hoped she didn't. Then one night I was sitting alone in the Portland field office scrolling through preliminary reports when a familiar name caught my eye. I stared at the screen long enough for the coffee to go cold. Cali Velez Defense Counsel listed on a case involving a client tied to a Sinaloan-linked laundering front. But I knew that name wasn't real, and I knew exactly who she was. Isla Velez, born Isla Varela, my sister. Same curl in the signature. Same law degree from Arizona. Same woman who once stood in a kitchen and told our parents I was a risk to our reputation. Now she was defending someone whose money ran through back doors I'd been chasing for 6 months. I didn't say anything. Not that night. Not to my supervisor. Not to the team. But I flagged the file and marked it for reassignment under Special Audit 42B, a code used when internal ties might compromise external integrity. They'd ask questions later. They always did. But I already knew what I was going to do. Because this time I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was walking straight into the house I was told to forget. I didn't wear my badge. I didn't need to. The courtroom was cold, all glass, and polished wood tucked behind a city building where the ceilings echoed when no one spoke. I slipped into the back row during pre-trial motions dressed in gray slacks and a dark coat, just another body in the gallery. No one noticed me at first. Not the clerk. Not the bailiff. Not even her. Isla sat at the defense table, flipping through a binder like she already knew the outcome. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, pulled into a sleek bun. Her lips lined in confidence. She looked like someone who never had to run to survive. But I knew that posture. I knew what it was hiding. The man beside her, her client, sat stone-faced fingers drumming quietly against the wood. I recognized him from the files. Money laundering, wire fraud, suspected cartel ties. Too clean to catch, too connected to scare. And now Isla was defending him. The hearing was procedural, suppression motion, chain of custody debate. But then the judge glanced toward the gallery. Her eyes caught mine. She froze. "Counsel," she said slowly, turning back toward Isla. "Is that Agent Vale in the back row?" The words weren't loud, but they landed like thunder. Isla stiffened. The defense attorney beside her, an older man with a tired tie, followed her gaze. I saw Isla's face twist first in confusion, then recognition. She blinked. Once. Twice. Her jaw clenched. My mother was there too. I hadn't known she'd come. She sat 2 rows ahead beside a man I didn't recognize, her rosary half wrapped in her hand. She turned slowly like part of her already knew. Her face didn't move, but her fingers tightened around the beads. No one said my name again. The judge recovered and resumed the motion. The room kept breathing, but not deeply. Reporters whispered behind laptops. A woman in the gallery typed something into her phone so fast her nails clicked against the glass. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, back straight, hands folded. I wasn't there to intervene. I was there to be seen, and apparently that was enough. When the hearing adjourned, I stood, nodded once to the clerk, and left through the same side door I came in. But I didn't take off the coat, because I wasn't hiding anymore. The invitation came 3 days after the hearing. Not from Isla, not from my mother. From a shared cousin I hadn't heard from in years. She used the word reconnect like it had never been broken in the first place. "We'd love to see you," the message said. "Just dinner, just family." I said yes. Not because I believed them, but because I needed to see how far they'd go. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Same beige walls, same brittle front yard. Inside, it smelled like citrus cleaner and old expectations. My mother met me at the door, her arms opening too slowly to seem natural. My father stood stiff near the kitchen, tie-loosened sleeves rolled. Isla sat at the far end of the table, quiet. A glass of wine untouched in front of her. Dinner was enchiladas and strained conversation. They asked if I was tired from work. They said the weather had been strange. They complimented my posture. We pretended, all of us. And then, halfway through a story about a neighbor's promotion, my mother cleared her throat. We were wondering, she said, fingers curling around the edge of her napkin, if maybe you might know someone in the DA's office who could take another look. Isla didn't speak. She just stared at her plate. My father added, it wouldn't be official. Just a conversation. You know how these things work. I picked up my glass, set it down slowly. If I weren't with the bureau, I said calmly, would I even be at this table? Silence. My mother's mascara smudged at the corner of her eye. My father straightened his sleeves like adjusting fabric could fix history. Isla finally looked at me, really looked, and I could tell she wasn't expecting me to say no. But I already had. Not with words, with everything I'd become in the years they didn't ask about. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and stood. They didn't stop me. They just watched as I walked out again. Only this time I didn't need to look back to know I wasn't the one leaving empty. It surfaced late on a Sunday. A grainy video clip barely a minute long, pixelated but unmistakable. Me, 20 years old, drunk, laughing, vulnerable in a way that wasn't meant for cameras or strangers. I knew exactly where it came from. He had threatened to release it once after I left him. I thought he lost it. I thought I had. The headlines came fast. Agents passed under scrutiny. FBI silent as scandal brews. They called it a moral lapse. They called me reckless, compromised, unprofessional. They didn't call it what it was. Assault. My team panicked. My supervisor wanted a press strategy. Legal flagged potential defamation. HR scheduled a wellness check. But I said nothing. I didn't need to, because I'd already lived through the shame, already buried the version of me they thought they could weaponize. Then my phone rang. Dad, flashing across the screen like a name I hadn't spoken in years. I let it ring twice before answering. You're dragging our name through the mud, he snapped. No greeting, no hesitation. Just accusation. That's what this is. Attention-seeking, vindictive. We raised you better than this. I held the phone closer to my ear. Let his voice spill through. Let it echo. I didn't drag anything I said evenly. I carried that name through the fire, alone, while you let it burn me. There was a pause, just long enough to matter. Then a click. He hung up. The next day, my inbox flooded with media requests. I turned down every one. That night, I stood in my apartment, pulled out the box I kept in the back of the closet, the one with old journals and receipts from bus tickets no one knew I bought. I lit a single match and let the video play once on my laptop. Then I closed the screen, slid the box back into the dark, and whispered, "You don't get to win just because I survived you." Then I went back to work, because the storm they sent was already weather I'd lived through, and I was still standing. I didn't answer their questions. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't offer a tearful explanation or a carefully worded press release. I wrote a bill. It started as a quiet outline on a notepad at 3 a.m, while my phone vibrated with gossip disguised as journalism. Then it became a policy draft, then a proposal, then something with weight, the Federal Kinship Interference Bill, designed to protect whistleblowers and public servants from coercion, blackmail, or intimidation rooted in family ties, because sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who try hardest to silence you. I sent the draft to a colleague in the ethics committee. No explanation. Just the work. The language was sharp surgical. I knew exactly where the loopholes lived because I had bled through them. A month later, I was invited to testify. Capitol Hill, Room 214B, Subcommittee on Civil Oversight. I wore navy, no makeup, no entourage, just notes and memory. "Thank you, Chairwoman," I began. "I'm not here to name names. I'm here because some of the most dangerous pressure doesn't come from the press or the public. It comes from living rooms, from people who raised us then tried to use us." The room was quiet. Not because they didn't understand, but because too many of them did. I never said father, never said sister, but I saw recognition bloom in their faces anyway. One congresswoman from Illinois leaned forward during questioning. "Agent Vale," she asked gently, "is this about you?" I looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "It's about everyone like me." The bill passed out of committee with full bipartisan support. Reporters stopped calling me a scandal. They started calling me a strategist, a reformer. Even the headlines grew teeth. She turned trauma into statute. When bloodlines betray law steps in. But that wasn't why I did it. I did it for the girl I used to be. The one who stood on a porch with a trash bag and no answers. The one who was told to stay quiet. And for the ones coming next who might never have to walk through fire alone. Because now there's a law on the books, one they didn't see coming. And I'm just getting started. She didn't make an appointment. My assistant just knocked eyes uncertain and said, "She's in the lobby." I didn't ask who, I already knew. Isla stood in the doorway 2 minutes later, small in a way I'd never seen. No makeup, no press behind her, no silver words to coat her guilt. Just jeans, a plain blouse, and the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. I didn't offer a seat. She took one anyway. For a while we didn't speak. The hum of the air vent did all the talking. Then finally she looked up. "I was jealous of you," she said. "Before I even knew why, you were always louder without trying. And I hated that." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just needed to say that." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. "You didn't break me," I said softly. "You just proved how easy it was for everyone to leave me behind." She nodded. No tears. Just a quiet acceptance that this wasn't forgiveness. It was fact. No hug followed. No dramatic closing line. She stood paused and walked out as quietly as she came. I didn't watch her leave. I just opened my laptop again, scrolled to the next page of my report, and got back to work. The forum wasn't televised. No press passes, no microphones. Just folding chairs in a federal hall occupied by people who had carried silence like a second spine. I stood at the podium without notes. I didn't need them. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about protection. For the ones who tried to do the right thing and got left behind for it." I introduced the Witness Line Project, a national support initiative for whistleblowers facing internal retaliation from family ties, especially in law enforcement politics and public institutions. There were nods, a few tearful stares, a stillness that didn't come from disinterest but recognition. And in the back row, my mother. Hands folded, eyes glassy. She didn't speak, but she stayed until the end. My father wasn't there. He never asked. Isla sent an email that night, just 4 lines. "Thank you for saying it out loud. For all of us who couldn't. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. You were. I read it once, then archived it. Because some things don't need responses. Some wounds just need air and time. And I wasn't here to answer for them anymore. I was here to speak for the ones who never had a witness." The room was already full when I arrived. I slipped in quietly, no fanfare, no press badge, just a plain blazer and a nameplate that read Vale S. It wasn't my event. It didn't need to be. A new class of recruits stood on stage, crisp suits and steady hands. One of them, barely out of college, paused at the mic and said I joined because of her. She pointed toward the crowd, toward me. A few heads turned, a few cameras clicked. But I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just listened. Afterward, as people trickled out, someone touched my arm gently. An older woman, a retired field agent. "We're proud of you," she said. Not loud, but sure. I nodded. I'm proud of me too. And I meant it. Outside, the air was cool. No reporters waited, no flashbulbs. Just the quiet rhythm of evening and the city moving on. I walked home without checking my phone, without looking back, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to be applauded to know the work mattered. And this time, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace.